Hello everyone. You are someone and I am someone else, and today we're going to be making fun of a YouTube channel that I really like to watch. I watch this YouTuber. His name is Midwestern Marx. And it's funny to me because he has all these conspiracy theories about, he talks about the Soviet Union, and he talks about these puppet republics that the Soviet Union had. Or I would say, whatever, they're different regimes that the Soviet Union somehow was intertwined with. I'm thinking to myself, right? Because, Romania, right? There were maybe some communists in Romania, but not enough to get 90% of the vote. I'm thinking to myself, there's this guy named Midwestern Marx, and he talks about the liberation of the labor class or the working class or whatever, right? And I watch all his stuff, and I just disagree with it. He talks about how China liberated Tibet. I'm like, what if Tibet wants to still be independent? Does anyone ever think, why is Taiwan independent and still doing better income-wise compared to China? Why are they doing better in China? They're not socialist. Generally, they have a higher welfare system than we do, and I do disagree with that somewhat, but at least their welfare system promotes the ideal of a family. Our welfare system is completely corrupt to the bone. Our welfare system, you actually are enslaved to it more than other countries. Anyway, that's besides the point, right? He talks about, China as, a liberator. He talks about Cuba as a liberator. He talks about Venezuela as a liberator. I'm like, these people didn't liberate anything. They just took resources and centralized it in a communist party to distribute it. He does not care about the monopolization of the state at all. He only cares about monopolies in a profit loss and profit sense in terms of corporations, big giant corporations. And I do agree with his claim that in order for someone to recognize the private property, you might need government. I can kind of agree with that. I don't agree with it entirely. I do think that you can have private property without government. There are examples that without governments that have private property. There are examples. Now, again, the rules of those properties, I guess you could determine as quote-unquote government. So, you could think about the Acadians. They didn't have really any government. There was no voting. It was all trade. It was all a very voluntary capitalistic market, right? They didn't have stocks like we do here in the United States, but they had a lot of stuff like that. Midwestern Marx doesn't understand the history of libertarian thought at all. He might read some Liebman von Mises. I don't know how many books he has. He doesn't read Chicagoan economics, I don't think. He doesn't read Austrian economics. By the way, he conflates the Austrians and Chicagoans way too much. He needs to really separate the four different schools of economic thought. He doesn't even separate them. He kind of says all the Keynesians are with the Austrians. I'm like, no, the Keynesians are completely separate from the Austrians. Any fool will tell you that. But Midwestern Marx does not clearly understand that. I don't even think he talks about the Keynesians all that much, to be honest with you. But he talks about utility theory versus labor theory of value, and he mixes up utility theory with subjective theory of value. I am like, oh my God, this guy does not read Austrian theory. He does not. He does not have human acts on his bookshelf. If he does, he misconstrued the entire lesson of what marginal utility was. Marginal utility is, I have a bottle of water. What's the best use for this bottle of water in my psychological need? Okay, I drink it, right? Okay, let's say let's say there's a shortage of water. Well, the last thing I'm going to do is plant my water. So the first thing I'm going to do is my wife, and my dog have the water before the plants. The marginal utility theory in my mind, or the marginal utility of those plants, is not as useful as the wife and the pets and me, right? And that's what marginal utility is. And subjectively, someone might value the plants over their pets, which is kind of stupid, kind of psychopathic, if you ask me, why you'd value a plant over an animal. But that is subjectively what could happen. There's a scarcity of resources. You're going to use a marginal theory. Subjective theory goes into marginal theory a little bit. Not entirely, but they don't really mix it up like he did. I am so baffled. And he's like, the Western academics, what does he call them? Neoclassical economics. I'm like, Austrians are not neoclassicals. I don't understand. How do you get from classical economics to neoclassical economics? Like, they're two separate, entire different philosophies. Classical economics talks about the cost theory of value. When you read Adam Smith, he talks about the cost of production. He talks about the cost of the labor that went into it as well. He talks about how complicated everything is. That's why that book is so big, because he talks about the trade that went into it. And you make a pencil. What goes into that pencil? Well, the guy who had the axe to chop down the tree, that also went into the pencil. It was thousands of people that probably hated each other, don't have the same religion. There wasn't some commissar saying to every single person to make that pencil. You trade a few seconds of your time when you go into that store for that pencil. And that's what the subjective theory of value is. Your subjective value is, do you value that pencil over that few seconds that you trade it with and that money that you're willing to part with? And I would say yes, for a lot of people, yes, because that pencil is worth it in at least the United States. I don't know about other countries. But Midwestern Marx doesn't understand anything about subjective theory of value. I mean, you can't, obviously with the Austrians, the problem I have with the Austrians, this is why I'm a Chicagoan, is because you can actually measure resources in Chicagoan theory. I am more of a Chicagoan in that sense. But I do agree with the Austrian school. So I'm going to try my best to explain the Midwestern Marx. I actually made a few videos on this already about economics. But the Austrians believe in the theory of human action. Right? This is what Ludwig von Mises calls it. Theory of human action. In his book, Human Action, by the way, Treatise on Economics. That's his book that he wrote. Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell say it is scarcity of resources that need to be measured, how resources are distributed and how they're measured, and how do you produce more of it. And the best way to do that is to incentivize investment. That's the conclusion they've came up with. The Chicagoans, the Keynesians have said, okay, well, we don't like the market cycles that the other two schools, because there's two schools sort of ignore it, or they don't ignore it that much. But I don't like the Keynesians that much, to be honest with you, because they believe that they can somehow, at least reduce the amount of market cycles, and every time they try to do it, it actually backfires. You look at Mr. Voger was actually okay. He understood what he was doing. But all the other guys, outside the Voger recession, he had to create the recession by popping that bubble early. But a lot of the other guys, they make the bubble way too big, and it actually hurts way more people than it needs to. And so by controlling interest rates and inflation, they can actually, instead of having big, giant bubbles, big, giant up and downs, they want a little thing like this. Problem is, all you're doing is you're just going up with a little bit, and then you're going to get into a big bubble, and it's going to pop massively. So I don't think you actually can control it as a Keynesian. I disagree with the Keynesians entirely on that graph. That being said, that's what the Keynesians believe. They are a very, very scientific form of economics. And then the Marxists have this theory, their general theory is that labor is what produces everything. And that's not necessarily true. Who came up with the factory before the worker was there, right? Did someone pay for that factory? Yes, there was. That happened to be a capitalist or somebody that put their capital. Some of the workers put in some labor into it, yes. But let's say I own a home, right? This is what I want to know from Midwestern Marx, right? This is a question I have from Midwestern Marx, and maybe he has an answer to this, maybe he doesn't. But if I own a home, right, and I hire a roofer to build me a roof, does he now own a part share of my home? I'm being serious. Does he own all the profits that I pay towards rent or even mortgage? Does he now have to pay the mortgage because he has part ownership? That would be ridiculous. Does he own, now the bank gives him money because he fixed the roof, and the bank is like, oh yeah, thank you for securing value for our home that we're gonna have this guy pay a mortgage down for 25 years. I'd say that wouldn't be a terrible idea, perhaps, if he believes in the labor share value. But I'm just saying, right? Because he clearly talks about it a lot. Does my roofer on my home own my house at that point? In Marxist theory, anyway. Because if you say that he owns the means of production and he owns the workplace, right? Does he now own my home because I gave him the workspace? I said, work on this space, and I pay him a wage? Or are you going to have the state do it and say the state owns the roof? Who owns the roof? I mean, does it collectively be owned? I don't know. These are answers I don't understand, right? Obviously, the banks own the roof. I have a mortgage. If I don't have a mortgage, or I'm a renter, I mean, if I'm a renter, it's owned by somebody else. And if it's if I pay down the mortgage, I own it. And if it's not owned by anybody, then I don't know. It's kind of strange to not be owned by anything. Or it's owned by the state, then it's owned by the state. Honestly, every land's owned by the state. 30% of all land's owned by the state. Let's just be real here. There's property taxes. If you count in all local, whatever, I like to divide up the taxes and add it all together and say like 30 to 40% of all taxes, or 30 to 40% of our economy is public. So in my opinion, I would actually argue that all property is collectively owned by the government. But that being said, that's fine. That's not really a big deal, right? But like, as somebody who just disagrees with Midwestern Marx a lot, and I'm not being funded by anti-think tanks. Like he has all these YouTube conspiracy theories, and some of them do sound true. He's like, oh, this guy made the script. It was like, what was it? It was like Kings and Generals was written by a writer from like a CIA op or whatever, right? Stupid U.S. government thing, right? And maybe that's true. Maybe he does work for the U.S. government and he works for Kings and Generals. But I don't think all of Kings and Generals is being funded by U.S. propaganda. I don't believe that. That sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory. I think it's way more possible for Chinese propaganda to be on YouTube than U.S. propaganda to be everywhere. I mean, you look at look what happened. We had way too many thumbs up. They just got thumbs down on the what is it, the presidential stuff that Joe Biden had on the White House channel. They got rid of the thumbs down button like a few months later. Now nobody can see it, and they got rid of comments too, which is funny. But like, the government's like literally ignoring criticism. And there are some things where he talks about the trade blockades. But the trade blockades only ban the United States from trading with those countries. And even then, there are Americans willing to risk their lives. There's a video. I believe it's on Reason TV. And I don't know if Midwestern Marx has watched this video. And he talks about these boats. This woman is talking about, she's Cuban. And she doesn't like the government in Cuba. Right? She's an anti-communist Cuban. And I want Midwestern Marx to watch this video. I think it would be very interesting to watch him try to dispute her, or maybe even say, oh, she's being funded by somebody. Maybe she isn't, right? Let's just hear her out, right? And she says that there are Americans she will hire, so these coyote runners will make a black market for drugs that the government of Cuba will not allow to people, because Cuba cares more about the equality of the services than the actual services that people are getting, right? And so what she'll do is she'll hire these Americans to go over and get drugs to these Cubans. I don't know if the video is true at all. Maybe Midwestern Marx is a different theory, but I believe in it because I watched the boats, sort of in the video anyway, go to Cuba. I don't know if any of those boats are actually going to Cuba. They might be just going to the Bahamas, sell drugs. I don't know, right? But I'm just going to say that it might be true, right? Let's just claim it is true. What's his response to that? Why should the government control all the prices of drugs? Why should the government control the drugs at all? Like, I don't understand that, right? And so these are, and like, why do the Americans get arrested as soon as they land in Cuba? Oh, because they're going to rely on the dependency of the United States? That makes no sense. Everyone relies on everybody. When it comes to trading, you need three parties for trade to even really be enacted. I mean, obviously, that's what Academic Agent says in his YouTube channel. Academic Agent. I do recommend you watch Academic Agent, Midwestern Marx. Anyway, those are my criticisms of this really, really strange YouTube channel that I watch, Midwestern Marx. I watch a lot of his content. I just disagree a lot with it. I'm still not convinced by a lot of things he says. Anyway, you are someone, I am someone else. Goodbye.